thank everybody for being here. If you'll rise for the invocation by Councilman Holland.
Let's bow our heads. Father God, we stand before you on this night that you have made. We pray that you bless this gathering. We pray that you bless us with wisdom, knowledge, and common sense to help us make smart and wise decisions. And oh, Father God, we pray that you be with us and get all the glory to you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Please remain standing for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, do we have any changes to tonight's agenda?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, you've all received, as a reminder, we are going to have an executive session after tonight's regular meeting. You've all received the minutes from our last meeting. If there are no questions or comments, I'll accept the motion to receive the minutes.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Lando Holland, I'll make that motion.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. All right, tonight we do have the real estate tax appeals from 7 to 9. Mr. Eric Pinner is here. Or do we have anybody here at this time?
There's no one here at this time.
Okay, Eric, stay with us until, okay, great. Do we have any correspondence?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, in light of trying to be good stewards of our time, we have a public hearing. We're going to go to new business number 5, if that's okay. And Ms. Ashley's going to present.
Yep.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So the resolution you have before you is to extend the voter registration deadline for the 2022 municipal election. The city's charter designates that the final day to register to vote would be the 4th Friday of March. Due to a clerical error, we did post that that was the 26th. So we're just looking to extend that deadline to the 26th as we've advertised to the public. If it's approved, we will be open on that Saturday. City Hall will stay open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. to help people register to vote or to just check and see if they're registered. So.
Okay. All right, are there any questions on the resolution to extend to March 26th? Councilman Henderson?
I would like to clarify that maybe this is a question.
Sure.
The city office will be open for voter registration only?
That's correct. For voter registration and to check registration status.
I just don't want it to be confused
Sure.
that the city office
We will not be
open
taking
for
utility
business.
bills, utility payments, or anything like that. But
Understood. Okay.
Thank you.
Question, any other questions from council? If not, I'll accept the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to make a motion to approve the resolution number 2022-01, setting the deadline for voter and non-resident property owner registration as March 26, 2022, as presented.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Councilman King, I'll second that motion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on the motion? If not, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilman Santos?
Aye.
Councilman Henderson?
Aye.
Councilman Holland?
Aye.
Councilman McCoy?
Aye.
And Councilman King?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you so much, Ashley, for your work on that.
I think you can.
Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and close our regular meeting and open up our public hearing. And I am turning this over to
Mike Bailey will
Mr.
lead
Bailey,
us through.
building official. Evening, Mike.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So this is a public hearing for the proposed code change to Chapter 15. And it encompasses various sections of that code, 15.7, 15.13, 15.20, 15.25, 15.27C, 15.30, 15.48, 15.41, 15.48F, 15.51, and this is basically adding provisions to the various zoning districts for solar facilities. Basically, we're looking to add 2 different definitions. An accessory, which is any roof-mounted or freestanding solar array that's accessory to the existing use, so what most people have on their rooftops, what we currently are permitting. And then a large scale, which is a non-accessory commercial facility that includes a shared community facilities comprising of one or more freestanding ground-mounted devices that convert sunlight to electricity for the primary purpose of wholesale or retail sales of the generated electricity. So, I mean, I can read through the rest of it if you'd like, but in each section, most of them, you know, in R1, we just added the accessory section there. R2, we did the accessory and large scale, because we may have a development want to come in an R2 zone with community solar for those residents in that area. In R3, we added the accessory solar system. R4, accessory solar systems. C1, accessory solar systems and large-scale solar systems. In C2, the accessory and large-scale. Accessory in M1 and accessory in M2. I believe that's all the additions.
And Mr. Bailey, could you just touch on the restrictions that would be placed on the large-scale facilities if this
Yes,
code were
yes,
adopted?
sorry.
That's okay.
So that we did add a large section that goes into specific requirements, and it would be by special use exception granted by the Board of Adjustments for a large-scale solar system. So no storage of materials in trucks and no repair facilities or housing of repair crews except within completely enclosed buildings. Architectural design of any building shall be subject to 1597. Perimeter fencing minimum 8 feet in height. Screening requirements subject to 1592. Setbacks as required in 1542, and that's the setbacks in C2 zone. Maximum height 15 feet as measured from the grade of the base of the structure to the apex of the structure. And not be located in any special flood hazard areas without the proper review and approval by the floodplain administrator. Maximum generation capacity 1 megawatt, and maximum land area is 3 acres. We want a bond for 100% of the removal costs once they've met their lifespan. A development plan showing all necessary improvements shall be submitted to the Board of Adjustments for their approval. And the installation of the solar facility shall benefit the residents and or businesses of the city of Seaford and not be contrary to the health, safety, or welfare of the city of Seaford.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions from council in regards to this change? Councilman King?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Mike, for clarity purposes, the city of Seaford currently has a municipal code for solar facilities, right? So we have a code that defines the do's and don'ts currently.
We not detailed like this. We've been permitting accessory solar, people putting them on their roof of their houses, and we've been permitting them for the past several years, but we never really had a clear definition of what was what in the code until this.
Sure. So if this new code passes, is it more difficult for people to go green under this new code than the previous code?
No, they'll still be able to apply for their rooftop solar units. And we do have in the electric rules the cap for solar citywide. There's a percentage that we're allowed to have, and we're.
Let me clarify that. What the building official's referring to is the net meter legislation only requires any entity, the city in this case that runs our electric business, to provide net meters equivalent to 5% of our annual peak. So we have reached that and actually exceeded that. So net metering, it's closed per se. You can't get a net meter application right now, but we have formed a line, a queue, so you can get in, and when if that peak grows and someone can get in, you can get in for a net meter. But nothing stops anyone from putting a solar array on their property that does not feed back excess electricity to the city of Seaford, or not asking for a net meter. Does that make sense, Councilman?
It does.
Okay.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Other questions from council? Okay. Are there any questions from the public? Okay, thanks, Mike. So we're going to go ahead and close our public hearing. Not a question, comments. Please, if you'd like to come up here. Questions or comments? I'm sorry, my fault.
Thank you very much. Well, Mayor Genshaw, member of the City Council, I appreciate your time. My name is Kieran Ciel. I'm the Director of Development for Dimension Energy. We're a leading community solar developer. We're headquartered in Atlanta, but active in all major community solar markets across the country. We currently have projects either constructed or actively under development in states like New York, Maine, Virginia, California, and New Mexico. And I'm here tonight to ask the council to either amend the current language in the solar ordinance to revise the maximum capacity cap from 1 megawatt AC to 4 megawatts AC in compliance of Delaware Senate Bill 2, which was passed last year for community solar projects, as well as increase the acreage limit for solar projects from 3 acres to an acreage that can facilitate a project of that size, 4 megawatts AC. Either that or grandfather Dimension Energy, as we have been actively developing a project over the past several months on a commercially zoned property along Sussex Highway in compliance with the Delaware Senate Bill 2, and this law would prohibit our project from moving forward. Over the past several months, we have made great amounts of development spend in coordination with both the city, Delmarva, and the landowner in order to bring this project forward, and we ask that rather than having us comply with the provisions as currently written, you would allow us to be exempt from the provisions, move forward to preliminary site plan review, which is what we intended, and based on our conversations with the city to date, to allow this council to review our project based on the actual merits it can provide the city. So to take a step back, I mentioned Senate Bill 2, which provides a context of why we're seeing more community solar in Delaware now. Essentially, this was a piece of legislation that passed last year, which expanded Delaware's community solar market. The key provision in that legislation is it expanded the size of community solar projects to 4 megawatts AC, which make them more economically feasible for development. And the purpose of this law is twofold. One, it offers a community choice program for Delmarva service territory customers to subscribe to community solar projects, much like the net metering provisions we just explained for the city co-op, to save money month over month on their electric bill compared to what they're paying for Delmarva. And additionally, it helps further the state of Delaware's goals to promote renewable energy. So when this law passed last year, our team went out through the state. We worked to identify sites that would make sense for community solar projects. And there's a number of different criteria that inform whether a site makes sense for community solar. One, it needs to be of a size to host the system, of which the site that we have here, which is a 100-acre facility, of which we'd be using 25. As I mentioned, it's Zone C2 commercial. It's the city council may know it by Smoot Family Farm. So as I mentioned, we're looking for a site. This one had adequate size. The next thing we look for is there feasible interconnection? So for there to be feasible interconnection, the parcel needs to be served by Delmarva Power, of which this site is. There's a service distribution line for Delmarva along the street, which has a service into our property. And that line has to have available capacity to be able to host a project, of which this one does. And then finally, the project site needs to have proper zoning, which would allow a solar project. And something that really drew us to the site was that it's zoned C2 commercial. Typically when we look at sites for development, municipalities like to avoid solar on agriculturally zoned properties because they want to preserve the future of agriculture in their community, and we think that's fine. And so seeing that this site is zoned H2 commercial, seeing that the city had intents for commercial development made a lot of sense to us. And further, in reviewing the zoning code itself, we saw that the city of Seaford allows for electrical generating facilities, of which a solar project, plainly speaking, is an electric facility, is permitted in C2 zoning districts by right. So given all these criteria that the site met, we reached out to the landowners, David Wheatley, who's in the audience with me today, as well as the Smoot family, to get more information about the site. And we found that this property's been in this family's ownership for a number of years. They've tried to market it for sale for a number of years, and they've had virtually no interest, no buyers. So this presents a great opportunity for them to make some money on their land. While we had this conversation, we were also aware that the city envisions kind of this Sussex Highway corridor for future commercial development. And we wanted to be mindful of that. We understand that you guys have spent resources extending water and sewer lines in this area. And so when we were working through this purchase agreement with the Smoot family, we were very careful in the design of our system. And I have some handouts here today that I can provide all of you. If you can envision the property, as I mentioned, it's around 100 acres in size. It's broadly rectangular shaped, but it's bisected by a Delmarva transmission line, kind of in the upper third. And what it creates is this 25 acres north of the transmission line, which is very irregularly shaped. It's triangular in nature. And when we were looking at this site and potential for development, frankly speaking, these are the worst acres on site that likely couldn't be used for other purposes. You couldn't really design a manufacturing facility or a building on this property due to its strange angles. But it's well suited for community solar. So the agreement we worked out with the Smoot family was to allow us to enter into a purchase agreement to develop this project, which would leave the remaining 75 acres, which are the best acres on the property, which are still set aside and can be developed for traditional commercial use for the city in the future to meet the city's goals. So we entered into this agreement in around October of last year. And since then, we've made substantial development efforts, interconnection studies with Delmarva, engineering and survey spend, purchase deposits to the landowner to further the site. And in around November of last year, we reached out to the city in preparation of a preliminary site plan application. Our attorney, Jim Fuqua, reached out to the city to let them know, to introduce ourselves and say, we're happy to work with the city. We are about to make this application. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have. We're, interested in making this process as seamless and as smooth as possible. And through discussions with city staff, we realized we had a slightly different opinion on what constitutes an electric generating facility. And so our company has filed a zoning determination appeal with the city, and that's currently submitted to city staff. Kind of in parallel with that, we suggested submitting an application for preliminary site plan approval, but we're advised that because the city is contemplating a solar ordinance, it'd be better to wait and we could apply under the existing or the proposed ordinance. So we said, that's fine, we want to be good partners, happy to wait for that. So we were quite surprised to find that the ordinance that is proposed here would explicitly prohibit our project, especially when it was seemingly based on the timing proposed in response to our project. And I understand why the city may have concerns. It seems like it's lumped into three buckets. The first is, of course, the existence of the city co-op. And we want to make very clear that based on the program that's currently passed by the state, this is specifically for Delmarva customers, of which, based on our analysis, we believe there are some residents and small businesses within the city limits who are Delmarva customers and could benefit from a program like this. But want to make perfectly clear, this does nothing to impose on the existing city co-op or those rate-paying customers for the city. The second piece to consider here is precedent. I understand that the city wants to put together a zoning ordinance for solar because they're concerned that approving one project will set a precedent that there'll be many other projects proposed afterwards. And the city doesn't need to be concerned about that. As I mentioned, there's many limiting factors that will or will not allow a solar project, of which the key is interconnection. As I mentioned, we have an ongoing interconnection study with Delmarva currently ongoing. We've had scoping calls with Delmarva to review our project, and they let us know that of the 12 kV line, there's only a certain amount of capacity available, which essentially is sized for our project. In fact, a little bit smaller. So the layout you see today is 4 megawatts AC. Based on our conversation with Delmarva, we are currently downsizing that to around 3 megawatts AC, which will leave even more space on site. And provide that our project is built and interconnected, it essentially eliminates any future solar development for Delmarva on that line without massive substation upgrades, which would be cost prohibitive. So just to say it plainly, this project would be the only project interconnected in this part of the city on that line. And then the third bucket I see as a potential concern for the city is aesthetics. And to that, that's something we're actively thinking about. In that packet, I included a letter that our council provided to the city based on a pre-app meeting we had with city staff last month, where we explained our intent to submit for a preliminary site plan application. And with that letter, we included a series of conditions, which largely reflect the proposed zoning language here, with the exception of the capacity cap and the acreage cap. We're happy to accommodate the city by things like complying with the underlying setbacks for the underlying zoning district and exceeding that to the greatest extent practical. We're happy to create and plant vegetative buffers around the perimeter of our facility where it would be visible from the road to mitigate aesthetic concerns. All these things are things that we're able to do as part of the project. And simply what we're asking the council today is to grandfather our project from the zoning provisions as currently written, based on the extensive work we've completed to date, to allow us to continue to preliminary site plan approval. And to be clear, by doing this, by taking this action, it creates no risk to the city. It doesn't mean we can go out, shovels ready, and build our project. It just allows us to go to the next step in the process, where we'll come back before the city council as part of that review, where the city can actually review the, criteria of the project we're proposing and make a determination of whether it's good for the city then. So, in short, we think this is a great project for the city. We think there are many benefits above and beyond what we've talked about today. We think there are potential benefits related to property taxes and tax revenue for the city. We think there's some benefit to Delmarva customers within the city, and we think there's a direct benefit to the property owner. So I appreciate this council's consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I hopefully look forward to talking to you again soon as part of our preliminary site plan application.
Any questions from Councilman King?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your.
Sure, my name is Kieran Seaford.
Okay, awesome. I've got a couple questions.
Sure.
Just so I can get a better understanding for clarity. So the ordinance, not the ordinance, what we currently have, right? Not the proposed revision, but what we currently have in the municipal code. Does this project meet that?
It does. Currently, the existing zoning code allows electric generating facilities by right in the C2 zoning district.
Okay. So this would prevent that project from coming to fruition, if I understand that. If this passes, we don't grandfather that in, then this doesn't come to fruition.
That's right. As currently proposed, this solar law would limit solar projects to 1 megawatt in capacity, which is very small, substantially smaller than what is allowed under state law, and 3 acres in size, which frankly is not a land acreage large enough to host a 1 megawatt AC project.
And so do you think if you knew this potentially at the beginning of the project, you maybe, because it sounds like to me you've had a lot of time, energy, resources tied into this, and now all of a sudden we're kind of at a point where we're submitting an application and we're saying, hey, we're changing the, potentially we could change the ordinance.
Yeah, that's right. When we're citing and identifying potential land, we're very careful in finding sites that we think make sense for development. And like I mentioned, we consider a lot of things: size, zoning, interconnection. So based on our initial research, when you think about finding sites, think of it like a funnel. There are a lot of sites at the top of the funnel, and slowly they're weeded out until what we have at the bottom are only those sites that make sense. So should this zoning law had been in place when we were originally doing that siting, certainly that would have been a limiting factor which would have eliminated the site. However, based on the current zoning code, which allows electrical generating facilities by right, this was an ideal candidate.
Sure. And just a couple small, short questions.
Sure.
You talked a little bit about the aesthetics. You talked about what that looks like. So typically, when you look at this is just my perception.
Sure.
When you look at it, it's not pleasing. I mean, it's great. I support green energy 100%, especially when you look at what our country's in right now.
Sure.
But when you look at it, there's sometimes, you talked a little bit about a buffer,
Yeah.
or you talked about, it's not right along commercial property on the front of the road, but it's towards the back of the property. Can you talk a little bit more about what that would look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we like about solar projects is that they're very low profile and not very aesthetically impactful. When you consider alternate forms of energy, a wind turbine which stands 200 feet tall, a large fossil fuel plant which has a large footprint, large transmission lines which are very visible. In comparison, solar is very small and very specifically short in height. So the type of system that we would deploy here, max height would be around 8 or 9 feet tall. And because it's small in size, and because we're working with a rather large property here, we're able to properly and thoughtfully design the project. We're able to maximize setbacks. So, the layout I provided today, I believe we're maybe 200 feet off the road. With this new size, this new capacity based on this feedback from Delmarva that we recently received, we'd be happy to redesign our layout. In fact, we've done some internal redesigns, and we find that with this new capacity, we could probably stay 600 feet off the highway, which would greatly put us out of sight of passersby. And then beyond that, we're happy to integrate various accessories like vegetative screening, typically rows of evergreen trees, which would be in front of our fence line, which would screen the project from view. So there are lots of things we can do to implement this to put the project out of sight. And frankly, with the city's intention to take the rest of the property and do a more traditional commercial development, say a warehouse or a manufacturing facility, we know those uses are significantly taller than 8, 9 feet tall. So once that's actually developed, I think very few people, if any, would be able to see the project from the street.
Right. And in the last one, how would this benefit the residents of the city of Seaford?
Sure.
Right. So you're talking about DP&L connecting, providing that service to them, not as far as the Seaford. So how would that benefit the residents of Seaford if this was to pass?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, our team has done some analysis on Delmarva's hosting capacity maps, specifically within city limits. And we believe there could be up to 100 residential and small business customers within city limits which would be able to subscribe and benefit from this project. And should this project move forward, I'm happy to work with Bill Bennett from the electric department to specifically identify where those people live, and once the project is developed, make sure that we reach out to them first to give them the first at-bat to benefit from the project. Beyond that, I'm sure as part of the reassessment of the property from vacant land to commercial use, there'd be an increase in property taxes, which would directly benefit the city for a use that's largely passive in nature that will not create a strain on city services. Think of it, a project like this has no need for water or sewer or no new school-aged children, no impact on traffic or highways once it's developed. So it's an increase in tax revenue with no additional cost to the city for services. And then above and beyond that, we're happy to explore alternate forms of tax incentive to the city. In other markets, there are common structures like pilots, payment in lieu of taxes, community host agreements, public improvement fundings. Happy to work with Charles and the city attorney and our council to understand what structure that could take, but we're happy to explore that to provide that direct benefit to the city.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of
Thanks.
course.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Other questions from Councilman Santos?
Thank you, Mayor. So, the city of Seaford has invested a lot of time and resources extending infrastructure down the highway. So you're saying that businesses will still be able to use that infrastructure, and this will not impede?
That's right.
And Charles, this is a question for Charles. Do you agree with that, or?
The plans that we have, we've already extended the water main north on Route 13, as you're well aware, Councilman. Sewer will start within the next few months. So we've invested approximately $2.5 million in infrastructure. If this project goes forward, that is acreage that will not need sewer. So there will be some stranded investment going by that property. When we looked at our design and sizing of those water and sewer mains, we looked at development of this corridor. So, this will not contribute anything to that water or need any demand on that sewer. So the initial assumptions that we made will not come to reality.
However, that is, available capacity that can be used for development elsewhere along this corridor. And to answer your first question, I do have a copy of the plan set that we would have provided as part of our preliminary site plan. I can show you. Perhaps we can pass it around. What you see here is this large kind of rectangular property, and you can see the transmission line bisecting the property. So you'll see that our project is really confined to that northern limit, which would leave that big rectangular area south of the right-of-way available for future commercial development, which would frankly be the best acreage on site. And should the entire site just move forward with commercial development, we would argue that that triangular area would really not be useful to commercial development, and ultimately would likely result in just staying as vacant land or perhaps stormwater facilities. So this is an opportunity to put that portion of the site to better use while also creating a benefit to the landowner who has spent many years trying to make a sale on this land.
Councilman Anderson?
Thank you. Mr. Seal, I'm a bit skeptical that there are up to 100 customers within city limits that are served by DP&L. There may be up to 100 customers who are adjacent to city limits or in enclaves. But I'm not prepared to accept that number that 100 residents of the city of Seaford would benefit from this solar array. The other, my other point of contention here is that this amendment to Chapter 15 is meant, I believe the intention of it is to address city utility customers. But what you're proposing to do is bypass the city entirely and interconnect with DP&L while you still lie within the service territory of the city of Seaford. And that will not directly benefit the utility users of the city of Seaford. The ancillary benefit would be the improvement of property values, possibly, property values for the purposes of revenue, of taxes. But I think that's minuscule compared to the adjustments to this chapter for utility customers that would be using interconnectivity to city utilities, which you're proposing to bypass entirely.
Well, simply to answer your first question, based on our analysis, we believe there could be up to 100 residential and small business customers. As I mentioned, happy to work with your electric department to, identify the exact number, because of course they would know better than anyone else.
Well, it's my understanding that in our service territory, residents who are within the city limits and businesses within the city limits are required to connect to city utilities. Now, there may be a few exceptions where we cannot serve, but I'm skeptical that it's 100.
Well, that's fair, and that's something we can explore. And certainly, if there are any residential or small business customers in the city limits who are DPL customers, certainly we would want to provide this benefit to them.
Yeah.
Frankly,
excuse me.
Sure.
My other point would be is that say it is 100. Say it is 100 residents. So that's 100. 1 megawatt.
A rule of thumb we use is 5 kW per resident.
Okay.
That's just a rule of thumb.
So that's 500 kW.
Yeah.
There's 2.5 megs going to another community that's going to benefit another community. And we're losing, it's not going to be interconnected with our utility. It doesn't directly, there may be some ancillary benefit, but I don't see the direct benefit to the utility customers of the city of Seaford.
sure. I mean, I suppose there are kind of two, perhaps, issues here that we're conflating. One being, a facility for the city utility, and then the other is an issue of land use. So zoning, in my opinion, is an issue of land use, and we feel that this law, as currently written, conflicts with greater state law that was passed, and isn't frankly practical land use because projects can't be built within the criteria currently proposed. You're right. Unfortunately, the law as written does not allow members of DMEC and the various city cooperatives to subscribe to a project. That's just the way the law is written. That's out of our control. But also want to be clear that this does not do anything to negatively impact the city electrical cooperative. The city cooperative could continue to work as it's currently working, and this project does not create any impact to them. However, it does create, as you mentioned, ancillary benefits through tax revenue, through the direct property taxes, and through these other structures that we can explore. In an area that, frankly, serves, would be benefited by a few other uses in the same way it could be benefited by a solar project. As I mentioned, for a traditional commercial development, this land would likely remain vacant.
Councilman Santos. If solar panels were to go in, what is the lifetime of those solar panels?
Sure. So typically a community solar program lasts around 25 years in its initial stages. The solar facility itself has a lifespan around 35 to 40 years. So we would expect, and frankly, I believe the law as written, the community solar program, does not designate a lifespan as other programs have. So the good working lifespan of the project and the ability to participate in the program could be up to 35 or 40 years.
And if the, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And do you guys have something set in place so that in 30 years or 25 years, do you guys have something in place so that you guys can replace it already?
Yes, that's right. So similar to the conditions included in the zoning ordinance, in the condition list we provided to the city as part of our letter, we said that we would not only comply with the decommissioning bond, we would post a decommissioning bond or letter of credit to ensure that, should we not be around in 40 years, God forbid, the city would have some mechanic way to remove the system from the site. And in fact, the condition we proposed to the city was in excess of what's currently included under the zoning code. The zoning code currently says a bond must be posted in the amount of 100% of removal. What we're proposing is 125% of the estimated cost of removal for the system. So it provides the city an even greater cushion to ensure that once the facility is removed, or once the lifespan of the facility has reached its end, the facility can be removed. And the other benefit of uses like this as compared to more traditional development is that this use is relatively low impact of the land. So at the end of 40 years, once the facility is removed, it's essentially back to basic ag land, which if there's another use 40 years down the line, can be used for another purpose.
I have another question. This one's, I think it's for Charles. Well, he mentioned that there's no real use for this land. Can this land be used for parking?
Yes, sir. Stormwater management, it could be used for parking, it could be used for, there's a host of things it could be used for.
But we think our solar facility compared to parking or stormwater basin is a higher and better use for the site.
Well, if there's, if this will benefit the constituents for parking, I mean, that's, that is a use where every constituent can use this for. So, but I'm afraid I don't know, I don't think I have an answer to that.
Well, I suppose your thought here is fair, but the other thing to consider is that we have a purchase agreement with the landowner today. As I mentioned, the landowner has for many years marketed this property with zero interest. So while we can, envision a future that has, a substantial use for the property, where that acreage can be used, that does not exist today, whereas we currently have an active purchase agreement with the landowner that could directly benefit them.
Is the owner present tonight?
He is.
Okay. That's it for right now.
Okay. Councilman King.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So can we talk just a little bit more about that? So the property's been on the market since when?
That's a great question. I also have the landowner's real estate agents here on site. Based on my conversations with the landowner, David, I imagine somewhere between 10 and 15 years. Sure. We've been trying to find a buyer.
And so if this doesn't pass, does that pretty much end the deal? Does that fall through? And
if there isn't a permitting pathway for our project, we would have no option but to terminate that purchase agreement with the landowner, because then we no longer have a use for the property.
okay. The second question I have, is there a power line that runs through the property?
There is a transmission line that bisects the property.
So that being said, how desirable is that for, when you look at, we're talking about potential development for
Sure.
for that property, wouldn't you think that would kind of maybe damper
Yeah,
potentially what you could do with the property? So I'm just saying,
I certainly think so, which is why I think.
how appealing would that be for like a residential community if you're living in the middle of a power line?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point to make.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify something, though, this is commercial, not residential, and just so you're aware, just to remind council, the Western Sussex Business Campus has a transmission line running right through the center of Ed, so that doesn't limit.
But potentially zoning could get changed though, right? Anything could happen.
Correct.
Anything can happen.
Anything could happen. All right, are there any other questions from council?
I would, but, since it is a public hearing, I think there's a difference of opinion, and I think that's what you're trying to work out with the city as to an electric facility and electric generating facility. I don't know of anything in the zoning ordinance that says electric generating facility.
You're correct, Councilman. Our zoning ordinance that's been referenced here does reference electric facilities, all right? Because we own an electric company, we put in the zoning ordinance because for many years we've been building poles, wires, transformers. So it's in our zoning ordinance to protect the business that we do, the understanding that we have. It was brought up by their attorney, and our attorney actually reviewed that and actually wrote a letter. And I believe Mike has a copy of that letter. Did you bring that with you, Michael? Yeah, Mike can get it. He can read it into the record. Our attorney, I'll summarize real quickly. Our attorney disagreed, the city solicitor. He stated their interpretation was too broad, overly broad on the subject. And that's why the attorney recommended that we pursue clarifying language around these facilities. Because in their interpretation, you know, and the gentleman referenced building a power plant, you know, with that overly broad, you could build a power plant, which is absolutely not the intent of our zoning ordinance or anything of that nature. So the building official actually has that determination that the attorney responded to them with. So I can read that into the record if you'd like.
Please. Yeah.
So we respond to their attorney, Jim Fuquay. Please accept this correspondence as the City of Seaford's formal response to your inquiry concerning whether a utility-scale solar farm of the type contemplated by Dimension Renewable Energy, Dimension Energy, is a permitted use in the city's C2 zoning district under the city's current municipal code. For the following reasons, it is my determination that although the city is presently drafting a code provision which would encompass this type of solar farm at issue, the solar farm is not presently a permitted use in the C2 district. And there's some background and some other things here in this letter, which I'll continue to read. By letter dated December 2nd, 2021, in follow-up to a phone call on this topic, you requested that the city deem the utility-scale solar farm contemplated by your client, Dimension Energy, a permitted use in the city's C2 zoning district. In your letter, you contend that, 1, the City Code Section 1540A1, Section 15, and Section 15-29A23 allows for electric facilities in the city C2 zoning district, and the proposed solar farm is an electric facility. The city code should be interpreted according to its plain language, and that permitting the use in a C2 district would not raise any concerns about the future use of such solar farms in residential districts. By email dated December 6, 2021, I advised you that I passed the letter on to our city solicitor, Dan Griffith, for a legal opinion on the issue. By email December 8th, Mr. Griffiths emailed you with his opinion that the proposed solar farm was not a permitted use in the C2 zoning district. So it goes on to talk about it. It gives some code references, and then I'll skip down to the analysis. Rather than reiterate the content and substance of Mr. Griffiths' December 8th, 2021 email as transcribed above, I would simply state the city will stand by its position as set forth in that opinion. It warrants mention that there is a long body of case law in Delaware confirming that in situations where a party is challenging a government's reasonable interpretation of a code, that government enacted Delaware's courts properly defer to the government's interpretation of its own code, and that deference is only more appropriate in a situation where the government's consisting longstanding interpretation has been challenged. And it goes on to talk about a case, the attorney gave a reference there. Solar farms are an emerging form of property use which were not contemplated or encompassed in the code presently. Consequently, it is difficult to conceive that the term electric facility as used in the code was intended to encompass a form of use not yet in existence. That issue is being addressed by code provisions presently being drafted. For all the foregoing reasons, my determination that although the city is presently drafting a code provision which would encompass this type of solar farm contemplated by Dimension Energy, the solar farm is not presently permitted in the C2 zoning district.
So
Let me just, if you don't
Sure,
mind.
of course.
So we did, as he referenced earlier, the first time we kind of heard about this was at, late 2001, and there were some phone calls about, is this a permitted use? We were clear it was not. So that started the back and forth. They obviously contacted their attorney. 2021. Did I say 2001? Yes, sorry, that goes way back. 2021, thank you, sir. They got their attorneys involved. We've been back and forth with them trying to clarify this situation with them. This is a path for them through this, is grandfathering. That's what's been requested here. We can still adopt the code, still move forward with that. We can do that either way, okay? But this is a path that is their path to grandfathering. They can also challenge this. That's another path for them subsequent to this, should they want to. But our interpretation is it is currently not permitted. It's too broad of an interpretation, but that is their interpretation.
Sure, and I suppose our point of view is that currently the zoning code does not define what an electrical facility comprises of. So when, in the absence of the definition, you must defer back to, the plain and broad definition of what that phrase means.
No, I'll reiterate again, our attorney says it is what the government says it is. It is what we say it is, because we wrote the code, we interpret the code. So poles and wires associated with our business, the code was written, generally finished in 1977. So solar farms were not contemplated, were not intended. Zoning codes are always a living document.
Sure. I mean, but clearly, the timing of this, what we have here is that an applicant has proposed a project. The city has said, let us take a moment to, develop an ordinance, and developed an ordinance in a way that would specifically prohibit the proposed use. So, we understand the city, has, thoughts about this type of development. You want to, kind of protect and keep your arms around this type of development. And simply all we're requesting here is, as we've done a substantial amount of work, prior to the conception of this ordinance, we simply ask that you allow us to move forward and propose the project as we conceived of it. And, as I mentioned, that doesn't allow us to go straight into construction. There's still lots of safeguards that the city has here to actually review the project and then determine if it's a good use for the site through preliminary and final site plan review.
Okay.
And we think that's fair.
Okay, thank,
One more.
sure.
How is he's made comments with a request. How is that actionable with what we're considering here? How do we,
If I may.
how does someone carve out for an entity, how does someone do a carve out?
So examples councils have done in the past, you can do a couple things. You can delay the implementation of a code to date certain, January 1, 2023. And that would give time for, we did that, council might remember, we did that with the impact fee ordinance in 1993. We gave development that was currently in the pipeline some time to build before impact fees enacted. That's what the council did. You can, your words, and I think they're correct, carve out this project specifically because they've requested it as part of your motion when you adopt the ordinance. That is another way of doing it. I believe both would be appropriate should you choose to do that.
Follow up?
Yep.
So if we accept later on, as written, what is the recourse of Mr. Wheatley and Dimension?
When you say the recourse.
To make an appeal to planning and zoning or the Board of Adjustments?
Yes, you're correct, sir. So, and we've talked with their attorney about potentially appealing to the Board of Adjustment because in my view, when you look at this, the proposal meets most of what we're talking about. I think it really boils down to size of the facility. They're basically willing to do everything else. And, again, I'm getting into opinions, but not the worst place in the world to do it, right? He makes some salient points about the, so we proposed, you could obtain a variance for the size. And it sounds like now, even as they progress in their design, the size is even coming down. So it might not even be as onerous. Mr. Fuqua contested that was a use variance, which use variances are harder to get legally. I think they prefer some consideration by this body versus having to go to the Board of Adjustment and make a legal argument. Those are my words. I don't know if you can opine on that.
I think that accurately captures it.
That's Councilman Santos.
What was the limiting factor? Well, how long was has this property been on the market?
My understanding is in discussions with the landowner around 10 years.
10 years. And what
I
was?
can maybe go back just slightly further. We annexed this property. The city annexed that entire quarter, and I believe it was 2005. I don't know if the property owner's been marketing it since then. I know we, staff, have had talks with the family pretty much from prior to annexation right on through about options for the property.
So broadly then, 15, maybe 17 years.
And what has been the limiting factor for the sale? Is it the price? Is it the location? Is it a floodland? Is it, what is it?
It's not floodplain. My understanding is that there's been zero interest.
There's also not been infrastructure up on that
Correct.
part of the road, which we've been working towards, right? So,
I have
Okay.
a question too. Not to.
okay. Councilman King?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if I understood it correctly, was there an application presented to the city for this project?
We, as Mr. Anderson mentioned, we've started talking with the city last fall with our intent to file a preliminary site plan application. We were told to hold off on that as we were filing our zoning interpretation appeal. Again, we met with city staff last month, and our understanding at the end of that discussion was instructions to submit a preliminary site plan application, which we have prepared and tried to submit last week in advance of this hearing, and was told at that time the city was not willing to accept the application. But it is prepared and ready for submission at any time.
So it was, Charles, can you kind of allude to that? Like, I mean, we're in a situation where we're potentially voting on an ordinance or a change in code that could prevent a project from coming to fruition. It seems, can you talk a little bit about that? Here's an application, hold off on the application, let's see what happens. Or can you just,
Sure.
for clarity purposes,
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, we started to hear about this at the end of last year, okay? They did not make any submission as stated until last month, official submission, after we met with them. I suggested that we meet to try to talk through. The building official and I did not see this plan until it was middle of last month, 17th of last month.
That's
I think
right.
we actually met in this room
That's
and
right.
we looked through it. We didn't do site design or anything. They just showed us what they had. We talked through different paths. They expressed to us where they were at. They again expressed their opinion that the ordinance permits electrical facilities. We went through soup to nuts. We went through that. We did not want to advertise something with this pending and their request to be grandfathered pending. So we did not take it through we're holding it. We're holding their information pending this meeting to see council's decision.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Well, it does, but to me, kind of looking at it, devil's advocate, the creation of this is to prevent them from the possibility of this coming to fruition. If somebody's got an application saying, hey, I want to do this, based on current ordinance, the definition of that, and they come in and say, hey, we want to do an application, and we're like, well, no, hold on to it, and then within a month, this ordinance is created, it kind of.
So let me go back a little bit, okay? As I stated, we did not see this layout nor have a lot of detailed information about it until 3 weeks ago. That's when we sat down and saw this plan the first time. So we did not know the scale, the magnitude, the location on the site, anything like that. So with that concern, with them saying out there, it's permitted, we're going to do it, we're going to move forward, in talking with our attorney, we needed to have some parameters around it.
Okay.
This could have been the entire site at 100 megawatts. We don't know. As we start moving forward with them, they agreed to sit down with us, talk about their proposal. It becomes more reality as they move forward. But no official submissions of a site plan was made until 3 or 4 weeks ago when we met in February.
Well, in fairness, I believe we proposed this as a community solar project in our initial outreach to the city. We were told, as we were filing our zoning interpretation appeal, to hold off on filing for preliminary site plan at that time. Something I just want to make clear here is, we're not, we could have, come here last week and, threw our application across the table and say, here it's submitted. But throughout this entire process, we presented this project as an opportunity to serve as good working partners with the city. We volunteered that this project could be a case study on which the city could develop its ordinance. And to your point, Councilman King, I wasn't at the January meeting when this law was first introduced, but I did watch the live stream, and it's plainly stated that this law was drafted in response to a proposed solar development on a commercial parcel along Sussex Highway. So I think you could argue that this was done in direct response to our application, or a proposal in interest in submitting an application to the city.
And we are getting conversations. The Director of Electric, Bill Bennett, and I have met with at least 2 other solar developers who've shown interest in our property.
Right.
The metrics have not worked out for them. And I talked, one of the comments that we made in our meeting with them was the city is interested in doing some solar. I mean, that was presented at one of our planning sessions.
Right.
So we're not opposed to these at all.
Well, how, if we're saying we don't want it, and this is my
We're not
last
saying we
question.
don't
just-
want it.
No, I'm just,
Yes,
so we're saying, hey, we're changing what we have. What we currently have, we want to change.
we're clarifying it and adding this use
Right.
in, yes, sir.
So how do you even have the possibility of grandfathering something in? If you're saying, hey, you don't want this, right, and let's just say this passes, but then we're saying, well, hey, we could potentially grandfather that in.
Yeah, so a couple things.
Could I speak to
Yes,
that?
sir, yes, sir.
Sure.
Well, let the city manager, and then you can,
So-
Councilman Anderson, you can add whatever you like after that.
So there's a couple scenarios that could unfold, okay? When we annex property, like we annexed the
Okay.
Sunrise Motel, that property was grandfathered in upon annexation.
Okay.
That's one method of grandfathering. This, acknowledging they're in the pipeline and giving them consideration, grandfathering is an interesting term. You're acknowledging they're in the pipeline and you're willing, I think the motion should say, you're willing to let them proceed through plan review process.
Okay.
I believe is really
Yeah.
kind of what you should say.
All right, thank you. Makes sense, thank you.
I just think it's fair to say that we've been in conversations with their legal team through this whole process.
Yes,
And
sir.
I think it's fair to disclose that he was our past city solicitor. So there's a relationship there that
Okay.
we've known Mr. Fuquay for 40 years. He was our
And I
solicitor.
apologize if it's not coming across this way, but all of our dealings have been very amicable.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I hope it's not coming
No,
across
it's
any
not.
other way.
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, I'm just trying to inform myself so I can make the best decision.
Yes, sir.
So no, it's not, I never took it that way at all.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the bulk of this chapter in the zoning ordinance is designed to create a benefit for utility customers within the city. Utility customers, because they're going to be grid connected. And to say, I mean, we're talking about semantics. If and when you construct this solar facility, you're going to have a sign out there that says community solar, but it will not be Seaford's community that benefits through the electric generation,
but
through
land-
electric generation.
But land use law and land use codes are for all the land within the city, and not all the land within the city is subject to the cooperative. Our property is Delmarva service territory. So how can you?
No, it
Yes,
is City of
thank you.
Seaford territory.
It is not, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to apply to Delmarva's interconnection.
You could,
Yeah, so what happens is, factually, when we annex, we are allowed to serve that. It becomes in our territory with the Public Service Commission. I believe what the thin line here is, I believe, and he stated it earlier, there's some type of service on here for something very small, because there's no houses or anything like that, but there's some meter out there serving something out there, right?
I do not know what is specifically serving, but what I can say is that today, that property is served by Delmarva Power.
And let's talk about service. There is a overbuilt and underbuilt pole line that runs in front of the property. The under deck is Delmarva Power, the top deck is City of Seaford. There's got to be some kind of meter out there. I believe there might be some kind of meter out there for something, or a historical meter. But once we annex, and it comes into our territory, so factually, Councilman Henderson, I believe, is correct. It is in our
Yeah.
service territory.
if you've got 150 amp service there that used to service the garage that's no longer there, but the service is still there,
That might be.
then it doesn't give you use by right to put in a 4 megawatt service.
I mean, it does under Delmarva's standard interconnection process. And what I could say in comparison, we have other
Well, that's-
properties within the state which
That-
are on property served by the cooperative, though there is a Delmarva line running past the property. And Delmarva has explicitly said we will not study those because that property is served by DMEC or the municipal cooperative. This is one where,
I've patiently listened to you,
Sure.
sir. We have a service agreement for that property because we annexed it. Delmarva Power will yield any future service to that property unless we, the City of Seaford, offer, through compensation, some accommodation.
happy to
I
talk
think
about
it'll-
compensation.
I think,
And that is why I'm not prepared to agree to any carve-out should this be moved on.
Okay. Councilman Santos?
Thank you, Mayor. Has there been any interest for potential developers since there's been infrastructure in place in that property?
Not to my knowledge, I'm sure.
No?
The eyes yet, the Lux, who is the landowner's real estate agent. It sounds like there's been no interest.
And if this was allowed to go through, would there still be an option for businesses to go in there? How would that work? Would
Yeah,
it be,
absolutely. So
would this
we-
be subdivided or?
That's right, it would be subdivided, and as part of our preliminary site plan application, where we would subdivide, currently, as you see on the map, that's around 25 acres of land. Perhaps when we downsize based on Delmarva's feedback, it'll be slightly smaller, and the remainder of the site will remain under the current landowner's ownership, and they could continue to market it to any other potential buyer.
One other question. Actually, I forgot the question.
Okay. All right, let me ask this. Are there any other questions or comments from the public? Mr. Bennett, would you like to come up? It is 8 o'clock, and we're going to go ahead and close. Is that the hour of our?
Yes,
So we're
sir.
going to go ahead and, no one's here? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close it. Mr. Piner, we're going to let you go.
Yeah, man.
Thank you for being here.
I appreciate it. Maybe I'll see you.
thank you, Eric.
Appreciate it. See you. Mr. Bennett, can you come up and share, and we'll come back to you, Mr.
I think this was.
Santos.
I just have a couple comments. One, as Councilman Henderson has stated several times, and the city manager has, that property is not serviced by Delmarva Power. Just like where 7-Eleven is building, when 7-Eleven tore that building down, if 7-Eleven hadn't torn that building down, it would have stayed serviced by DP&L. When they tore it down, it became our territory. I don't know on that back 35, 40 acres, whatever they want, if there's a building back there in a service, and if that building's gonna stay. The building is torn down, it's our territory. It does affect the city of Seaford utility, because if you block that out, it limits what can be built in front of it, because you have to have so much open space, so much parking, so much stormwater. That area could have been used for that, and it takes it away. So it would downsize the load that would be out front. As far as 100 houses in Seaford served by DP&L, there's about 6 on Pine Street, North Pine Street Extended. Depends how old you are. For me and Dan, it's Pine Street Extended. Behind Dunkin' Donuts or something, but that's an enclave. Those houses are not in city limits. And Hoover's is served by DP&L, and Hoover's is not in city limits. It's another enclave. DP&L has a line running down Stein Highway. That doesn't mean they can service Hardee's.
Right.
Or PK or anybody else. And that is in our territory. And if you go by their definition of code allows generation, they could build a 4 meg natural gas plant for generation, or a 4 meg manure to energy plant, or a 4 meg wood chip to energy plant. Now, I don't think that's what you want in a commercial zone, and I don't think it meets the definition of our zoning and codes. I think they're trying to stretch it. And, I don't know if anybody has any questions, but
I think we're, Councilman Santos.
In your opinion, is there any value to the constituents? Is there any revenue coming in to the city of Seaford from this? Is there any value whatsoever from your point of view if this was to go forward? And I guess the other side is, if this was not allowed to go forward, do you see more value to the constituents?
If it proceeds, I don't see any value to the city of Seaford constituents.
And if it doesn't,
It may be a couple dollars a year in tax increase, but I talked with somebody back in October, She didn't identify who she was with. I don't know if it was his company or not. But she said they were looking at a commercial solar out on land on Route 13. And they were gonna connect to DP&L. I said, well, if you're out there on 13 and it's in city limits, and she said it was, I said, you have to connect to City Electric. And her comment was, well, that squashes that plan then. I don't know if that was his company or another company. I don't know, but, because she didn't identify herself or what company she was representing.
I have a question. And this is like completely out in left field, but I'm gonna ask. So it wasn't annexed in the city at one time, right? So the property wasn't in the city. They say, hey, we wanna annex into the city. Can the property owner say, I don't wanna be in the city anymore? Can they unannex?
No. No.
Once you're annexed, you're, okay.
Yes, sir. That's been asked before.
And the property owner has to be
No, I'm
annexed.
just asking, right? Because
Yeah,
it
the
wasn't, it
city-
is. Can someone say, hey, you know what,
Yeah, the city couldn't force them to annex the property, and
Right,
it has to
right.
be annexed into Seaford, and it passed by vote.
okay.
Councilman Santos.
Thank you, Bill.
So, I like the idea of green energy. So I do see a value in a way to the constituents, not in monetary value, but is an investment in people's future by trying to be more green. We know that, you know, it's been an uphill battle for many years. You know, going green. But you know, so I do see that as a way of investing in the future. You know, not so much in getting monetary value, but seeing, you know, well, healthier world for
Amen.
the people that we're going to leave this world for, right? So I do have to think about that. And we've gotten a lot of information tonight, and I think I need some time to digest the information, and yeah.
And there's, you know, they said this was the only piece of land that met criteria. There's acreage right around DP&L's North Seaford substation that is farmland, just like this is farmland, that they could build a 4 meg, or whatever that substation will allow, 3 or 4 meg solar farm generation plant on that property right next to Delmarva Power's substation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close.
Are there any other comments?
Are there any other comments or questions from the public? Okay. It's 8:06. We'll go ahead and close our public hearing and reopen our regular meeting, and I'll call up Mr. Mears for new business number 1.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
So I put a recommendation to Charles, I think you guys have all have it in your packet, that I'm requesting a seasonal, one seasonal position to help assist with picking up leaf and limbs this summer. Well, the seasonal position would be from the beginning of May to the end of October, somewhere in that time slot. We spoke about it in planning session, and I believe there's a need in our department to hire this seasonal employee.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Mears in regards to a seasonal worker? If not, I'll accept a motion.
All right, Mr. Mayor, Councilman King, I will make a motion to approve the recommendation from the Director of Public Works, Burley Mears, to hire a seasonal employee to assist with the city leaf and limb service as presented.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilman King. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, second from Councilman McCoy. Any questions on the motion? If not, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilman King?
Aye.
Councilman McCoy?
Aye.
Councilman Holland?
Aye.
Councilman Henderson?
Aye.
Councilman Santos?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Mears. All right, next we have the permit for the installation of the temporary lift station. Is that Mr. Mears
Mr.
again?
Mears
I don't know.
again.
I'm not quite sure why he sat down, but he's getting his steps in tonight or something.
He's probably waiting.
It's a lot to follow.
Wait for
There's a lot to follow here. Yeah, so the Sunrise Motel, as you all know, is annexed in, and they're looking to do some upgrades out there. And they were going to put in a gravity sewer main, which kind of hinged on Lakeshore Motors being in place first, so they can connect into that. So being that Lakeshore Motors is kind of on a pause, they wanted to back up and punt a little bit, and they want to know if they can put in a temporary, what they're calling a temporary lift station and force main to put it all the way, to send it all the way down to Lowe's. So we had to come up with an agreement that we sent over to them. They have not yet, we're not yet finalized it, but we're asking for approval of the language that we presented. Basically that we have to take ownership of it because it's in our utility right away. But any maintenance or replacement or anything that we do to it, they would have to pay for it. We basically just have to kind of maintain it and locate it, and allow it, so.
All right, are there any questions for Mr. Mears on this agreement? If not, I'll accept the motion.
All right, Mr. Mayor, Councilman King, I'll make a motion to approve the agreement to permit the installation of a temporary lift station and force main to serve the Sunrise Motel located at 22512 Sussex Highway, Seaford, Delaware 19973, as presented.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Councilman Henderson, I second.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on the motion? If not, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilman King?
Aye.
Councilman McCoy?
Aye.
Councilman Holland?
Aye.
Councilman Henderson?
Aye.
And Councilman Santos?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. All right, we're going to invite the chief down to talk about 4 vehicles. He's in a suit and not in a uniform, so it's,
good.
Actually,
it's got a very
actually
brief.
came here to save you money. I'm only going to ask for 3. So I would like to make a change to that.
Okay.
The reason that I'm here today is we're getting ready to go into budget, obviously, for FY23. And we have some car situations. I think you're already aware of that. So we're asking for the council's approval to order 3 vehicles now. We're looking at a dealership that offers, that can get, right now, 3 state cars on state contract pricing. So we wouldn't have to go out to bid. We have to make the order within the next week, 2 at the very most, or they'll be gone. And then there's an 8-month lag time before we could actually get them. So we would never take possession of those vehicles until well into FY23. But with that said, these vehicles disappear like they could already be gone. So I'd like to also ask for the council's consideration that if they are gone, that if we can go out to bid instead of through the state contract. And the reason that I'm not mentioning Enterprise is we can't even order cars from Enterprise for another 6 months. So if we wait 6 months and then we have an 8-month lag, more likely than not, those cars won't be there. We've already missed 1 year of ordering cars in 2020, and we still haven't even taken possession of the 3 cars we ordered for this current fiscal year, and I'm not sure if we're going to get them by June or not. And in fact, one of those cars we couldn't get and we have to go out to bid. We're out to bid right now. So we're in a bind for cars. We've got a couple broken down. And I'll give you an example. If we were to order these 3 cars now and we get the other 3 cars that we've already ordered, we're still going to be 4 cars down, I believe, from where we should have been based on our initial plan. COVID and restrictions of the cars and everything has just really put us behind. And there's more complications because the pricing's gone up. That's one of the reasons I looked at this and I've chosen to cut it back to 3 cars instead of 4 to see if something breaks loose in the next year. So the total on this to outfit 2 of those 3 Ford Explorers for patrol cars and 1 CI admin car would be basically $172,000. It's just shy of that. And you know, that's, so when they ask, we'd have to get a loan through a different vendor rather than Enterprise. So I'm not asking to go away from Enterprise. It's just, I think this is our best option for right now. We're going to potentially not have cars for another year plus.
Okay. All right, are there any questions in regards to the 3 vehicles? Councilman King?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Chief, just to talk a little bit about the lease agreement, right? At one time we purchased, then we made a decision to go on a lease, and now we're discussing purchasing again. Is that any conflict with our lease agreement that we currently have?
So, not that I'm aware of. They couldn't provide, if we contact them and we enter into an agreement to purchase more vehicles year to year, and we sign that contract, then we're obligated. We've not signed anything that says we're going to order so many cars from them. This was a plan before I got here, I believe in FY 19 or 20, that they proposed to replace 17 cars, 5 in the first year. So when I got here, we actually took possession in August of 2019 of 5 cars. And the next year, we got 3 instead of 4. And then we didn't get anything. And now we're still waiting for 3 others. So it's not really an enterprise issue. It's more of a supply and demand issue.
Market issue.
Right, but it's still, if the commitment was you're given this specific amount every year, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I mean, they're not delivering on the promise that they made us. If you're going to give us 5 and 4 and 6 as each year progresses,
Well,
I mean, if they can't even meet, what we've discussed, right? I mean, we have to.
The
Yeah.
replacement plan was just it was a plan, a replacement
That's
plan.
correct.
We signed no long-term
Okay.
contracts. The contracts, as the chief has stated, are for the vehicles we lease. We have to go term on those vehicles that we lease, the 5 that he received in 2019 when he first arrived, and then the ones we've leased. So if we go away from enterprise, there's no issues. We can go back to them.
Absolutely.
If their supply chain loosens up, so. All right.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
Yes,
Thanks.
sir. Yeah.
Any other questions for Councilman Santos?
Chief, how many broken down cars do we have?
Our admin cars is what's starting to fail now. We focused on patrol initially, and so because of that, though, we've gotten our old Durango, we put so much money into, it just broke down again, and it's just not worth putting money in. I just pulled a vehicle from a lieutenant to push down to CI, and there's some car sharing going on, or maybe one of the old mechanic pickups being driven right now.
Are they in the shop right now, or?
I'm not putting it in the shop. We're going to make do best we can, because I'm hoping to get these other cars in by maybe June.
Is it possible to park that car in City Hall? Broken down car?
Pardon?
Is it possible to park that broken down car in City Hall?
Could do anything you want, but why would we?
I think he's referring to a potential decoy car.
Oh, no, this is like a
chase away
1900s
elected
Dodge
people.
Durango, all white with rusted out fenders.
Okay, thank you very
It wouldn't do
much.
you any good. It wouldn't do you any good. I'm sorry, I was thinking the Dodge Durango, and I didn't explain it. It's a plain, white,
Good idea. Good
rusted
idea.
out fender Dodge Durango. It might cause more problems.
You're right.
Councilman Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in our meeting yesterday, you were going to check to see availability with one of our vendors to see if those cars were still in the fleet or still available.
Yeah,
And I must have missed it if you mentioned it.
Yeah, no, I was out in Dover all day today, so I did not get a chance to call. We just verified Friday, and what she told us was as long as we place the order, within 1 to 2 weeks at the most, she'll be able to get us the 3 Ford Explorers.
Okay.
And it's been since Friday, so.
All right, if there's no other questions, I'll accept the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve the request of Chief of Police Marshall Kraft to place an order for 3 police vehicles in advance of the fiscal year 23 budget as presented.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilman Henderson. Is there a second?
I'll second. Are you?
Councilman McCoy, second. Are there any questions on? Yes, sir.
I could also make a comment that this expenditure would not be in the 2022 budget. It would end up being
Yes, sir.
next year.
All right, so we have an amended statement and motion from Councilman Henderson and a second from Councilman McCoy. Is there any questions on the motion? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilman Henderson?
Aye.
Councilman Santos?
Aye.
Councilman Holland?
Aye.
Councilman McCoy?
Aye.
Councilman King?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. Thanks, Chief. All right, next we have the memorandum of understanding from the Teamsters. We have Mrs. Merritt presenting.
Good evening.
Good evening.
All right. In your packets, you have a memorandum of understanding, and this is due, it's for between the City of Seaford for the Police Department and General Teamsters Local 326. If you recall, we were in negotiations, and we were able to obtain our collective bargaining agreement last fall, and since that time, we've been administering initiation fees and membership dues, and there was nothing spelled out in the agreement as to what those fees were and how much they would be charged or when they would be charged. And so, just for clarification purposes, we thought we should put it in writing and amend that one section, which is for Article 4, Section 4.1. And it just is spelling out that upon completion of a probationary period, all employees will have the right to join or refrain from joining the union, that the initiation fee is currently $350, and union dues are based on 2.75% of the employee's hourly rate of pay. It also spells out that if a new hire, if we were to hire someone that's already COPT certified, and they are already a member of the General Teamsters Local 326, then, and if they are in good standing with that organization, that they would not have to pay an initiation fee just because they changed employers. So basically, they came from another agency and came to us. If they were already part of the General Teamsters, we would waive that initiation fee. So that's what this memorandum of understanding is.
All right. Are there any questions from Mrs. Merritt? Councilman Henderson?
It's my understanding that for at least one employee that these fees have been withheld, and my assumption would be that they were forwarded to the union. So can we look forward to getting compensation back from the union so that we can then reimburse the employee for their outlay?
Yes, there was already an officer that was still in probationary status, and like I said, unbeknownst to us until just recently, we should not have been claiming or payroll deducting those fees. So we have spoken with that officer. We've made an arrangement so that at what time that the dues would begin again, it incorporates what they've already paid. So we've kind of prorated that date or moved it forward so that at that time what they've paid would be the correct amount.
So you're going to leave whatever amounts you've already paid the Teamsters alone and then just prorate it to the employee?
And the officer was fine with doing that.
Okay, any other questions? All right, if not, I'll accept the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding between the City of Seaford and the General Teamsters Local 326 that would modify Article 4, Section 4.1 of the current labor agreement to clarify joining the union, initiation fee, and union dues amount as presented.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilman Henderson. Is there a second?
Mr. Mayor, I second that motion.
Councilman Holland seconds. Any questions on the motion? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilman Henderson?
Aye.
Councilman Holland?
Aye.
Councilman McCoy?
Aye.
Councilman King?
Aye.
And Councilman Santos?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you, Mrs. Merritt. Next, we'll have Mrs. Newcomer come up and talk about the county grant, matching grant.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening. Good evening.
On Tuesday, March 4th, Sussex County Council amended their budget to create a one-time grant opportunity for all the Sussex County municipalities with the realty transfer tax funds. They're allowing that grant to be used for public safety, economic development, public works, and infrastructure. Based on their calculation, the city's qualified for a grant from them in the amount of $500,000. The first $100,000 of that grant, it is just a grant. We would have to then match the remaining $400,000. Council has in your packet a letter that I have drafted to go ahead and submit for that application. That's why I'm here this evening to get approval to do so. Applications are due by May 31st. For our match for that, what we're recommending is to take it's actually more than the $400,000 which were required. We've been able to figure out that we have about $608,000, $657, out of reserves that we can take to match that. That would give us about $1.1 million towards the Phase 2 project of the Western Sussex Business Campus. There's certainly still more to be done with that. That project as a whole is roughly around $5.1 million. We have put in a request with the state for bond bill funds as well to try to put that towards that. But so that's what I have. Any questions?
Any questions from Mrs. Newcomer in regards to the county matching grant? All right, I'll accept the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the proposal to submit for a Sussex County matching grant in the amount of $500,000, $1 million total, $1 million total project to assist with funding of necessary infrastructure improvements for the business campus.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilman Santos. Is there a second?
Mr. Mayor, I second that motion.
Councilman Holland, second. Questions on the motion? If not, the roll call vote. Councilman Santos.
Aye.
Councilman Henderson. Aye. Councilman Holland.
Aye.
Councilman McCoy.
Aye.
Councilman King.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Mr. Newcomer. I also want to say thank you to the county and to Councilman Vincent for leading this. This applied to all towns in Sussex County. This is a huge lift for all of us trying to invest. So it's it's something they don't have to do, but they did. And it means a lot to us. So, all right, back under old business number 1, we have the rental licenses. Are you leading that conversation, or is Mr. Bailey?
Mr. Bailey is.
Mr. Bailey.
Good evening again.
Good evening.
So this would be the second reading for ordinance 2022-04 for Chapter 5, and it's adding Section 5.4.4, refuse services required. And the language would be for each rental unit to be provided refuse collection services by a city licensed refuse hauler company. In each rental unit shall be provided containers that meet the requirements in Section 10.1.2. Apartment complexes and buildings that are serviced by central dumpsters located on the property are exempt from Section 5.4.4.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Bailey? Councilman King?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. The city of Seaford currently has an ordinance in place that refers to what we saw at the last meeting, like the trash buildup on a rental property, right? So,
Right.
So can you talk a little bit around what that ordinance is and what happens if somebody doesn't follow that ordinance?
So if there's trash collected, built up on a property, if we get a complaint or we just see it riding around, we notify that property owner that has to be cleaned up within 10 to 15 days. If they don't do that, then we have to write a work order, have our crews go out, pick it up, and we lien the property. That could take a month and a half sometimes before it's all the letters are received and work orders are scheduled. So I feel like this ordinance would provide them an opportunity to get the trash in a container and have it picked up weekly instead of having it pile up on the side of the house.
Sure. And so how many rentals, how many properties would you say violate the city's ordinance around trash?
We probably get 8 to 10 a month, you know.
Different properties, same properties?
Sometimes it's the same properties over and over again, but sometimes it's new ones, you know.
And the reason that I'm asking, I mean, and this is more of a comment than I have a question. You got a few bad apples that's ruining the entire basket.
Right.
Is there any thought around increasing or maybe making the accountability aspect of the ordinance that we currently have tougher or stronger to hold those people responsible versus telling everyone saying, hey, we've got 10%, 8% of our current rentals that aren't abiding by the ordinance that we have in place, and now we're going to make everybody get trash?
Yeah, currently the way that ordinance is written, for the first offense is a $100 admin fee plus the hours for the crews picking it up, and every offense after that is $500 plus the hourly charges. And for some people, they don't seem to mind. They probably don't even pay the bill until they have to.
Okay.
It just sits out there until we
All
get
right.
it for.
Thank you, appreciate it, thanks.
Councilman Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In light of a statement Councilman Santos made at the last meeting that it's not equitable, it's not, the responsibility is not evenly spread from homeowners to renters, that you're going to focus on rental licenses to provide refuse services where a homeowner or owner-occupied owner or a non-renter doesn't have that. They have market choice. They could elect to go to the landfill every weekend or whatever. And in light of Councilman King's statement, we have ordinances on the books that would fairly address this, and I've had conversations with the city manager. In lieu of this ordinance that seems to be not quite equitable amongst property owners across the city, I would be more in favor of adding either part-time staff or another position to do enforcement. We have ordinances on the books, and it seems like the administrative costs or the fees and the penalties are pretty prohibitive. I mean, if they get enforced. So, but we know you have a department of 3, you're doing 600 plus inspections on rental licenses, you're doing how many dozens or hundreds of building inspections plus plan reviews. The 3 of you are tapped out. So, plus you're writing work orders for violations, high grass, vermin, vicious dogs, the whole lot, right? So I'm more in favor of investigating additional either part-time or full-time staff to help your department do enforcement. And then we would not have additional ordinances, which are cumbersome, because once you make this ordinances, someone's going to either refuse to do it, or you'll have more enforcement with the same manpower, or people will just find a loophole and get around it. So I've asked the city manager to look into some costs, so to support or refute my position. Would you?
Yes,
please?
sir. Yeah, based on our conversation and some conversations I had with the building official, the council could look at a part-time person, 29 hours a week for 52 weeks a year, which would total about 1,508 hours annually. If, just a number for council, we could use a pay grade 4, which is $16.75 per hour. So when you do that math, it's about $25,259 a year as an example of the pay requirement for that. So if the consensus of council is that they'd like us to do further investigation into that, where would we put them in the building, what vehicles do we need, other budgetary items, we can certainly put that as part of our budget proposal for the code department in the next few months coming up.
Could I sorry, question?
Councilman Holland?
Hey, Mike, do you feel by adding another person that would help you, in your opinion?
Yeah, I believe it would.
Enforce-
More eyes on the road, yeah. we would see
Enforce
it.
the ordinance that we have in place?
Right.
Okay.
Councilman Santos?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually drove around. I got a map sent to me from the code department where all the rental properties were laid out, and I drove around the city for about an hour, and I looked at the rental properties, and I'd look at a property and be like, okay, this one has trash out there, and I checked to see if that was a rental property or a owner-occupied property. And as I went around the whole city, I did not see a direct correlation between the trash and it being a rental property. And I also rode around maybe another 20 minutes with Councilman Orlando to see if he thought along the same lines as this. So I agree. I think we should focus with the stuff that we have, with the ordinances that we have, and that's just my study.
Councilman King?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Charles and I talked a little bit about this in our liaison meeting. Would it make sense to, when the landlord comes in and applies and fills out the rental license agreement, and they get the permit, would it make sense to add some of this language into that? And so that way there's no kind of gray area, and could that speed the process up? Because believe me, I hear you, of how long our current process takes with a letter and then waiting for a response and then follow-up. And like you're saying, it could be 3-4 months before work order is issued and it's done. Is there any way that you could put that language or maybe put some emphasis around that into that license? And then when they sign off on that, right, when they come in, they sign off on that and they pay the money and they get that permit, that this topic could be discussed maybe along with any other issues that we're currently seeing?
Yes, sir, Councilman. Based on our conversation we had, some of the thoughts we had, the code department currently has, even in several languages, trifold handouts that they give out related to trash, sidewalk program, various city programs. I think the building official can work with our economic development, community relations director and her staff to potentially put together a flyer that explains this to the landlords, maybe even to the tenants. We can do a small marketing
Well,
campaign.
I think there's a little bit of a gray area here, because I hear some of the landlords, some of the people that own the properties, like, why am I getting the letter, right? I'm renting my property to this person, and you're giving me the letter, but as a
They don't
property owner.
realize it applies to them.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. So I think if you can kind of clean up some of the gray area, I think something like that, some type of tool like that may help with the process.
Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Charles, in our discussion, you also made some mention to streamlining the communication process for violations so that it didn't take so long. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, at our code meeting on Thursday, we discussed that with the code officer, the building official, and the building inspector. And, Mike laid out the process of notification, sending a certified letter. We try to do the soft approach first. We try to reach out if we know them, make a phone call. We can, and council did this about, I think, 10 or 12 years ago, Mike might remember. We kind of truncated that whole process for grass. So we do one grass notice during the growing season. So one thing we'll cut the grass 3 or 4 times under that same notice if we need to. What we talked about was doing the research necessary if the code's not in place, modifying it so that we can do one notification for trash. So, one of the council people said if there's is it a reoccurring problem or new ones? So maybe we can kind of take off the plate some of these reoccurring problems that take so long. So code department's engaged on that, and they're going to work on that.
Yeah, it is in the code, a version like that. It's one notice for every 6 months for trash.
Okay.
So that'll help us with how we administer it.
Good. All right, if there's no other questions, then I will accept a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to postpone this order of business indefinitely until an alternate solution can be forwarded.
Can be brought back. Okay, so we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Councilman McCoy seconds that. Are any questions on the motion? Okay, I'll do a roll call vote. Councilman Henderson?
Aye.
Councilman Santos?
Aye.
Councilman Holland?
Aye.
Councilman McCoy?
Aye.
Councilman King?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll look forward to you
Thank you, Mike.
bringing it back. All right, thanks, Mike. All right, you're still up.
Yes.
All right. You leading the charge?
Yes.
Well, it's the second reading for Chapter 15, amended, adding language for solar facilities.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Bailey or the city manager?
Yes.
Councilman
This is the
Henderson?
same language as we heard for the public hearing?
Yes, sir.
We've made no change, just to add to that, sir, we've made no changes since the first reading.
Okay.
Understood.
Councilman Santos?
No questions as far as the motion, but I do think that I need time to think about this and ask questions.
Okay. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll accept the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to table this until the next meeting.
Okay, we have a motion to table. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that motion.
Okay, are there any questions on the motion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilman Santos?
Aye.
Councilman Henderson?
Aye.
Councilman Holland?
Aye.
Councilman McCoy?
Aye.
Councilman King?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous,
Thank you.
so we'll table that and bring that back as well. Okay, thanks. Mr. Bailey, all right, reminder of meetings?
So I only have one this period, Delaware State Police Academy graduation. I know several of us are going to attend that, 4:30 p.m., March 17th, 2022 at Dover High School. And then we do have the municipal election coming up on April 16th from that Saturday from 7 to 3. We do have mayor running for re-election, Councilman McCoy running for re-election, Pat Jones has filed for mayor, as well as Stacy Witt Spicer has filed for council seat. That's all I have, sir.
Okay, very good. All right, we'll start off reports with Councilman Santos with administration and IT.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My report has been submitted in its entirety. Meetings that were attended by city staff were the Greg Patterson with the governor's office regarding the ARP leverage funding. They participated in the DMEC 4Q Finance Committee. They met with Bill Ned to discuss electric services to new lots on Hurley Park Drive. They attended the WSBC progress meetings. We attended the SCAT meeting in Laurel and the SCAT steering meeting in Georgetown. Other works. Attended the Public Works Tech 1 interview, and for the IT report, they worked on submitting their budget. They provided numbers provided numbers to departments on various IT projects. They completely upgraded the VDI environment to the latest software levels. Worked with Undercom to repair fiber and run new fiber. They spliced in new fiber to replace sections where squirrel chewed on the line in a Hall Street. They replaced an old line from the firehouse to Cedar Avenue and added new connections directly to the water tower. They reused the section coming out of Cedar Lift to the intersection. They replaced the police department in-car laptop and cleaned up wiring in a couple of police cruisers. They replaced batteries in the command vehicle and had electric RV outlet installed at Park's shop. And all other business is routine.
Okay, next we have Police and Fire. Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll abbreviate tonight's report. Seaford Volunteer Fire Department Chief John Wilson reports that there are 184 calls to date as of March 7th. And there are 669 calls to date as of March 7th for EMS calls, for a total of 853 calls from the department to date, for an average of 12.9 calls per day year to date. There's a list of significant calls, including a working fire on Magnolia Drive on February 24th. And the rest of the responses, for significant responses, were assists for other jurisdictions. Under apparatus, Tower 87 is out of service for its annual DOT inspection, and E87-5, Rescue 87, and Tanker 87 have all completed their DOT inspections. We have a new hire, Hunter Blake, who has completed his first 2 weeks of EMT field training. And we have another employee who's out, still out on jury duty, or still out on duty. He has a possible injury. The last training class was March 3rd, and that was search and rescue evolutions at Station 87. Next training class is March 24th for rapid intervention evolutions at Station 87. In other news, the department participated or lent out Tower 87 to Fred Douglass for a science project where they had a project, they dropped eggs from 50 feet. They had the students had to build a device that would prevent the egg from breaking, so that they all participated and had a lot of fun. And I think there were approximately 30. Was it about 30 experiments? Yep. And surprisingly, there were 3 or 4 that survived the egg drop. So, you know, I think Fred Douglass has it on their Facebook page. If you use Facebook, I think I may go back and look for it. So, on the 26th, that happened on the 24th. So when you're scrolling back, you can look for that. And on the 26th of February, some fire department personnel attended the Virginia Beach Fire Conference to explore new opportunities for equipment. Moving on to Seaford Police Department, Chief Kraft has submitted his report showing the total complaints column for year-to-date 2022 against previous years. Under all crimes, there's 141 with a subtotal of felony, misdemeanor, and violations subdivided there for a 78% clearance rate. You'll see the crime view charts, which you can maximize through your document program to make it easier to read. Under drug complaints, there were 13 total drug complaints, 12 adult arrests, and 1 prosecution declined, along with 1 overdose. Pardon me. Fortunately, there were no juvenile arrests. There is hope. Under traffic, you'll see the subdivision there below. There were 186 traffic contacts, resulting in 103 citations and 13 warnings. 1 DUI, alcohol-related, 26 crashes, 2 unfortunately were injury accidents, 6 hit and runs. There were no pedestrian accidents during this period. You'll see, pardon me, a number of significant events, along with one of note that we hope to be able to recognize a citizen in the near future for a heroic act. On March 4th, I'll go ahead and read his excerpt here. Seaford Police Department dispatched to a crash on Stein Highway. The operator of vehicle number 1 was unresponsive behind the wheel while traveling westbound on Stein Highway in front of the middle school. Vehicle number 1 hit the curb and then started to drift into oncoming traffic. A witness to the event traveling eastbound made a U-turn, positioned his vehicle in front of the uncontrolled vehicle, and used his vehicle to stop the other vehicle before it entered oncoming traffic. Seaford Police Department arrived on the scene and could not find a pulse on the operator and removed her from the vehicle. Seaford Police Department officers began compressions and applied the AED, while others collected witness info. EMTs arrived on the scene, took over CPR, and a shock was delivered through the AED. A pulse was then found, and the operator was transported to Tidal Health. And the next of kin was notified to attend to her at the hospital. So the actions of this eyewitness he put himself in danger to save harm to the operator and to other people, and we're hopeful that we can recognize him in the future, either at a council meeting or at another event. So I'm going to end on that high note. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Codes, Parks and Rec. Councilman Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We start off with Parks and Recs. They perform maintenance at Jay's Nest, Seropolis, Riverview Parks for the upcoming season. And they're in the advertising for 2 seasonal part-time parks employees. And they held the 2nd annual 6 to 9 and 10 to 13 of age all-star games for youth basketball, as well as skills competition on March the 1st and March the 2nd. And they are continuing soccer registrations. Last day to register was March the 4th, and so far they have 100 children participating.
Wow.
And they are holding Riverfest committee meetings for the 2022 with the theme Soaring Over the Nanticoke. And all the work is routine. That concludes my report for Parks and Recs, and I'll switch over to code. They have 1,515 rental license has been issued with 91 completed. Rental license and late fees have been assigned to delinquent invoices, and all the work is routine. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Next, Electric, Councilman McCoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll hit a few highlights. Since the last report, the crew pulled in the primary wire and made up the terminators, wired the meters, and have the transformer ready to energize when they sign their service agreement. Nick Smart finished week 7 of 8 for his lineman training. It was stopped in the middle of the week due to someone in the class testing positive. They combined the 2 meters at Dover Pool into one. In regards to our director, he had his standard director's meeting, council liaison meeting, and staff meeting. Also attended the virtual DelDOT Utilities Summit and worked on inputting the FY23 budget numbers. Over the course of the next few weeks, goals are going to dig in the primary conduit at 7-Eleven. Dylan Calloway will take week number 1 of 8 for Lyman School. And they have a meeting with the developer about the single-family section of Bel Air. That's a few highlights, but the report's been submitted in its entirety.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councilman King with
Thank you,
Public
Mr.
Works Wastewater.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My report has been submitted in its entirety. I'm just going to touch on a couple highlights. I'm going to start with Public Works. The team has been busy out filling potholes around the city. They're working on the alley, some of the alley maintenance. Of course, Burley's spending a lot of time working on the budgets and doing a lot of Zoom meetings and things like that. There's plenty of equipment maintenance going on, and with all that being said, there's still one person down. We'll jump over to the wastewater treatment facility. All's going well. Plant performance remains good. And some of the upcoming activities over the next 2 weeks is the flushing of hydrants, install a new pump panel at the BCLS, and then, of course, all routines, continue all tasks. But I have just one real quick comment that I want to make. The boys basketball team, Seaford High School basketball team, is in the semifinals Thursday night at 6:30 at Bob, University of Delaware, against Tower Hill. So just wanted to reach out to the community to make sure we show that team some love. I reached out to Trish today, last minute, and of course she's got a lot on her plate, but there's some things that the city's going to do in support of that. And so I just reach out to the community and businesses and just really get behind them and show them some support, and go Jays. And with that, that concludes my report.
All right, thank you very much. All right, appreciate everybody's input. A long meeting, but got it done. So appreciate everybody. With that, I'll accept the motion to go into executive session.
Mr. Mayor, I make that motion.
All right, thank you. Councilman Holland, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Councilman McCoy, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, thank you. Good night.